We've invited a stellar lineup of guests who offer a range of perspectives, roles and experiences from academia and practice. And they're going to discuss these and other issues that you, as our audience, might raise. So this is a kind of question time event, and we have some prepared questions from people that couldn't come, some that could, and we hope that you will participate. And if you do, it would be great if you could say whether you're a student or a practitioner, where you're from, so we get a bit of context on that. There are a student team who've been working really hard to help us put this event on, and they'll be coming around with mics. So Carole-Anne, our chair, who I'm going to hand over to, she will kind of orchestrate where the questions go, as and when. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you have a good evening.
Good evening and welcome to the Burt Acres Lecture Theatre and the Welsh School of Architecture conversation on education and practice, expectation meets reality. I'm very pleased to be here to support the event, as is the Design Commission for Wales. Without much more fuss, I would like to formally introduce our panel. To my right we have Gerard Evenden, Senior Executive Partner at Fosters and Partners, who confesses to have grown up in Rada, 26 years at Foster and Partners, pursuing his interest in innovation and building materials and technology all over the world, Masdar City, Dubai, huge projects in the UK and globally, private, public and third sectors, and most recently, of course, Cardiff Central Square, where he's led the team at Foster's with White Acres and the BBC Cymru Wales headquarters. Thank you for joining us, Gerard. Next to Gerard we have Dolunay Dogahan, who's a student here at the Welsh School of Architecture and who is the protagonist, who has brought tonight's debate together and has collated some of the work that Carole-Anne was talking to you about. She's the founder of Involved Mag, and she will be opening this evening's debate. She has a background in television and media, and she really wants to keep this conversation going. She's very passionate about giving a voice to younger people. Just beyond Dolunay, I'm pleased to welcome Piers Taylor of Invisible Studio. You may have seen him on television doing one or two things, but you may also really enjoy the approach of Piers' practice, which is really about trying to work through architecture to bring real social and political value and make a wider contribution through those buildings to the world they occupy. Shankari, otherwise known as head honcho of the nudgegroup.com, is also an activist in that fashion, a big collaborator and really interested in the bigger picture, the global issues, and taking on some of the big questions, the power of the banks, the apparent unaccountability of some of the practitioners in the field, the big contractors and parts of the supply chain. So Shankari comes to this as well from a wider perspective. And last but not least, Dr. Harriet of the Royal College of Art, who is an author, reader at the Royal College and leader of the programme of architecture, and who is very interested in what she has described as architecture's perennial inequalities. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening's panel. To open up, I would like to invite Dogahan to take the floor and to take 5 minutes to set out her position.
What is the point of architectural education? I wouldn't be exaggerating if I was to say everyone who has gone through it has at least once asked this question to themselves. Seeing how we are picking it apart and trying to change it desperately, more so than ever, we either haven't found the answer to this question or we're not happy with what we got. Most of the criticisms around architectural education fall under a few questions. 1. Is the architectural education too long? The thing that is missed when we ask this question is that we're not complaining and being lazy about going through 5 years of education. We do realise that most professions now require more than 3 years of undergraduate education. However, whilst our peers, like engineers, graduate and go out there and create startups and pursue their creative ambitions, we graduate knowing nothing about how to run a business, how to set up our own, or how to build a building. 2. Is it financially viable? Jonathan Surgeson says most graduates that graduate from architecture schools in the UK are simply unemployable, despite having to pay £100,000 minimum for architectural education. And when they do get employed, they have to work long hours, thinning out their hourly rate, hence making architecture as one of the least paid construction professions. How this is a good business practice for any of us, I do not know. 3, and I think we know the answer to this question. Is it too stressful? I came across a tweet by Marcus Meeson of Meeson Architects the other day, who says, one of the problems why many architects do not know how to design for everyday life is because they do not have a life. It was funny, except that it wasn't. It was real. 1 in 3 students reported stress-related mental health problems last year. Every 2 in 3 students said they had to work through the night, and 1 in 3 having to do this on a regular basis. We know these statistics. We don't need to be told. We've done this. I have been myself told by a tutor that an architect's working day is 15 hours, and if I don't do this, I don't work hard enough. And last, the favourite question of them all, does it prepare for the industry? Now, I would like to take a step back and ask which industry we're talking about. The industry that suffers from gender inequality and lack of diversity. The industry where bright young people walk into a room to have an interview with a CV full of interesting experiences and skills, only to be asked, but can you use Revit? The industry where most young people like myself are kept out of meetings and are made to feel that their opinions are invalid until they get a title. The industry where 94% do overtime according to the Asian survey, with 30 reporting to do so on a regular basis. The industry where demanding flexible working hours is still problematic for parents, especially for men whose job is still seen as being at the desk and not at home, raising kids. The industry where the architects taught in university design for people end up designing for developers. Then, my answer is no, I am not ready for this industry. The point of architectural education should not be to produce ready-to-go architects who fit perfectly in the architecture industry that is far from being perfect itself. Instead, I say, give us the means to realise who we want to be and how to achieve that, so we can go out there and create, build, live and work the way we believe to be right. Then, everyone will stop asking if we're ready for the industry and say, is the industry ready for us?
Thank you very much, Dolunay. So, Gerard, is the industry ready for them?
Well, I'm not sure that, having heard all that, that I would be an architect yet. But I think that the key is really what we're doing. And having been in practice for maybe 35 years now, I think that the key to the whole profession is what you do and what you deliver, and you have a responsibility in terms of what you're delivering. And I don't think that once you're involved in the profession in the right way, I think that time isn't important to you. It's more what you are putting in and what you're getting out for yourself, which is the important thing, what you're giving. So time has never been, for me, time has never been a big issue. And you have to go through the process of late nights and long days. But that's part of the profession. And that, I think, is also part of many professions, if you want to be successful.
Okay, on that point, Harriet, can I come to you and just ask, well, if it's accepted that, well, it's just a profession and there's many professions, is that okay?
Okay, so I need to just rewind because I think there's a few assumptions in the room about what an architecture degree is for. So let's just start with a fascinating statistic. Only 33% of students studying architecture in the UK will ever become architects. 66% will do other things. So when we start talking about the value and relevance of an architecture degree, if we keep judging it against the metric of whether or not you ever design a building, whether that's independently and in a creative way like somebody like Piers does, or in a commercial way, such as for developers, what are the other 66% doing? Because anecdotal evidence in a study that I'm involved in suggests that the people who leave actually go on and do really successful things. They go into other sectors like culture, they go into media and the arts. Many stay within construction, become project managers and even developers themselves. I've heard stories from a lot of developers saying, I trained as an architect, but I make sure I never tell anyone in construction meetings because they won't take me seriously. But I think it's really interesting because all this money, all this time, what is the real value of it? If we keep judging it against buildings, we're never really going to understand the true value. And let's rewind also to think about what you learn at a school. So you're not the only ones that do all-nighters, right? Medical students, they get thrown into A&E. You want to look at all-nighters, go to A&E, and that's an all-nighter. So it's not exclusive to architecture that there's long hours of overwork and stress. And that's a path that you choose, and you choose it willingly. And in some ways, it's there because it's about rehearsing you or pre-preparing you for the conditions of practice, which are problematic. But I think it's not the only industry that suffers from those conditions. I think one of the things that I value and love about architecture education is its epistemological richness. So you do geography, you do history, you do fine art, you do graphics, you do illustration, you do if you like, aspects of engineering, anthropology, ethnography. It's this epistemological richness is what pre-prepares you for such exquisite options when you graduate. So I know I'm going slightly off piste on this one, but I think we're wrestling with questioning one of the problems of this debate, or at least potentially it could be a problem, is this idea that if architecture is all about buildings, and if you're not doing buildings, you're not successful. And we need to just completely disrupt that notion and really start to re-examine what the true value of an architectural qualification is.
Shankari, that's what you're about, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say that I think that's a really good point that you make about, are you guys, is the industry ready for you? Because essentially, this is an opportunity for you to work between the gaps. So when I finished architectural education and I worked for 3 or 4 different practices, what I found was it wasn't right for me either. And actually, I re-engaged with architecture in a completely different way. And I project manage my own jobs, and I actually find the subcontractors, and often I find my own clients. And it's finding, and I do kind of play the protagonist and the activist, and I will write articles for the council when I'm annoyed with what they're doing. And this is a real opportunity for you guys to get out there in the world and deliver what you want to deliver, and it doesn't have to be through a big practice that and working with a developer. You've got an opportunity to do things differently, and you have to find those gaps in the market to make that happen. And I would agree with you, when you do those first 3 years, you should consider it like a geography degree. It makes you a creative disruptor. It makes you it gives you the skills to work differently and to come out of it and go into the public sector or work in transport or become a builder. And there's a whole range of things that you could go into and not just be an architect. And it shouldn't be considered a failure that you do 5 years and then you're not going to become an architect. It actually gives you a whole series of life skills and an opportunity to become a really good project manager.
Isn't that true of many forms of education, though? Many forms of degree education as part of the university preparing you for life. So I wonder if we are shying away from the pace and the occasionally brutal form of the way we develop and train and educate young architects. So shouldn't they expect more? Piers, do you have a view?
Well, I think if we expand and look at education generally, I think there's a big problem. And I think there's a kind of tyranny around education which exists still. There's kind of one route, there's one path. You go to school, you get GCSEs, you get A-levels, you go to university, and it's kind of super orthodox route that, and if you diverge from that, it's incredibly hard. So I was expelled from school, I had no GCSEs, I had no A-levels, although I am a chartered architect. I did go to university as a mature student in another country where a route was opened up to me. And in a way, I kind of designed my own education, I would say. I have 4 children, and equivalently some of them are designing their own education. And for me, there's a kind of presumption around orthodoxy. What is the profession? And the profession is in a constant state of flux. So up until 1976, what was really interesting is that 50% of architects worked for the local authority. Now it's 0.1%, if that. I think that's a big problem. So in a way, I think there is a big problem with the way that private practice dominates the industry with the concerns of the market. And I think increasingly there is this problem of long hours and exploitation. And I would say, if you look at the way young architects are supported in practice, I would say they're not supported at all. If I look at the way young doctors are supported, I would say they are supported, despite the concerns about funding in the health service. So my son-in-law is a junior doctor, and actually his route through education at Cardiff, curiously, his route into medicine, his route into being supported through the choice of specialism has been kind of empowering for him. So the word that I use when I look at what architecture students come out with is a sense of disempowerment. They're not empowered.
Unique to this profession, but how on earth are we going to get the kind of purpose-driven, numerous pathways into practice kind of world that you are describing if you are currently where Dolunay is and certainly not where Gerard is? Dolunay, do you want to say some more about that? You touched upon it in your opinion.
I think it's not acceptable to blame someone that they're not committed enough in the profession of architecture simply because they refuse to make it all their lives, simply because they want to have balance, simply because they want to have a family and to be there for their families. And I think this is why most of us are silenced, because we're blamed that we're not working hard enough if we're not pulling the late hours. We're blamed that we don't have enough passion. And I think this talks down the whole problem that is being discussed at the moment with the mental health issues. And Harriet touched upon medicine, but we know that nurses are suffering from this as well. And I think that is something that should be thought about, and maybe they forget what it was like being the young one in the office, working long hours and not really getting much appreciation for it.
Just a quick litmus test. How many of you out here in the audience recognise the kind of world that Dolunay is describing, and also have some, to think about what Harriet was saying, that we're actually measuring this stuff by the wrong benchmark? Take the first thing first. How many of you recognise Dolunay's world? Yes. Oh, that is a significant number of the room. And what about Harriet's points that actually we're looking at this the wrong way around? Okay, not quite so many, but a fair feeling in the room that there is a lot wrong here. And yet we've also heard there's a lot wrong in all sorts of professions. I would like to bounce Chris Tweed a bit, really, as a way of saying thank you. You're in charge of all this, you're leading this kind of education. What have you got to say? And I understand you have a question as well, so let's just take me to that.
It's nice that you think that I'm in charge of all of this.
I know how you feel.
I will pass that up in the university hierarchy. Yeah, I mean, the points that have been raised are very close to the question that I framed earlier before, obviously knowing what anybody else was going to say. I'm a career academic. I have very little practice experience. I'm committed to architectural education, but that's two words, architectural and education. I'm as much committed to education as I am to architecture. I'm an expansionist. I believe that architects have a lot to offer outside of architecture because of the education that they've had. And in the good old days, we used to hang on, and this is my question, we used to hang on to a distinction between education and training. In today's higher education sector, I think it's increasingly difficult to hang on to that distinction. So my question, I guess, to Paul is, can and should we hang on to that distinction? Which is maybe another way of framing questions that have already been raised.
And just give the panel some time on that, and to make sure I understood correctly. We are in a world where we train skills for work. We may or may not have an emphasis on a rounded education. Is that what you're getting at?
That's what I'm saying, but the other side of the coin is that I think that higher education is increasingly commodified. And it is, it is seen as being something that produces highly employable graduates again, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we mustn't lose sight of the well-rounded human capital that we used to generate and still do.
Harriet, do you want to come back on that?
Oh yeah, I mean, so many ways. Certainly tonight you can go onto iTunes and download Ivory Tower, which is a very interesting film showing the state of higher education in America and really how it happens. America kicks the ball and we catch it pretty much in terms of policy relating to all kinds of things in higher education. But I think that it's a massive problem. I totally agree that the commodification problem is actually changing, again, what's valued and what's important within the higher education experience. I mean, traditionally it used to be a space to think, and increasingly I think many universities really just seeing it, are really operating courses as profit engines. We've seen that in America with the rise of for-profit universities, and now in the UK we have for-profit universities, and it's a bad thing. Please Google this later and learn all about it. And one of the reasons why we haven't really we continue to have the triptych in architecture, part 1, part 2 and part 3, is because you guys generate enormous revenues for UK universities. So what incentive do they possibly have actually to shorten the course to make it more affordable? Not much. And one final point, Norway recently, Denmark, decided to close a few architecture schools and stop any more programmes opening in the UK. The opposite is happening, strangely, even though there aren't enough jobs. And their argument was that there was not enough jobs in their labour market to support architecture graduates, so why should they keep training them on the public purse? But if you think about England, we have 30,000 people studying architecture at any one point in time. There are 10,000 architecture jobs in this country, and with the likely recession that will occur after Brexit, I'm not sure that necessarily you'll be doing architecture, even if you really want to. So I think one of the responsibilities of architecture schools is to encourage you to think about the skills you have and potential multiple applications of those skills. To come back to Chris's point, teach you skills that are about resilience, about tenacity, about experimentation and risk-taking, about the niche, about these fringe opportunities, but also, finding other pathways outside of construction that could be just as lucrative, just as creatively rewarding, and potentially just as civically powerful as architecture can be. So do not feel that this is a kind of we're on the Titanic, folks, and I'm ringing the bell or playing the violin. I think what you have is a phenomenal set of skills. The ability to think in 3 dimensions, the ability to transform complex problems with that skill set. I think the world is your oyster, effectively.
Gerard, I want to come to you in terms of your international practice, but also those numbers were a little bit scary. How many training in England and how many jobs available? Do we know what the Welsh statistics are? How many do we have training and how many jobs do we have available?
I don't know those off the top of my head, but I would say that quite a sizable proportion of our student body come from overseas, so they're not necessarily looking for work.
And they will go back to international practice.
Yeah. And we're very pleased that they do that, because we're part of the school and we like to think that we're spreading the Welsh School ethos beyond the shores of the UK.
Gerard, you're in international practice, have been for many years. So I'd like your perspective on this before I come back to Piers and Shanks on the kind of hyper-local as well as the international.
I think the first point I would make is that this is a global profession. So for me, architectural education is just actually about learning how to find out information. And the interesting thing with the architectural education is that you can focus on one small thing and that can become your thing, or you can decide to focus wider. And in terms of how you develop your own profession, that's completely up to you. And depending on where you take that has pluses and minuses. But that's something that is an individual choice. The other point I would make is that the idea that think if we were all suddenly employed in a local authority, it would be nirvana. I worked, my first job was actually one summer in Cardiff's local authority architects, and it was a great place to sleep. I think private practice, what you have to understand is we are businesses, we have to make money, people have to make money to feed themselves, and actually you don't go into work just to enjoy yourself, you actually go in there to create things and also to make money, and one comes with the other, and you have to do that if you're going to sustain yourself. So I suppose in the controversial world, these are the things we have to balance.
Shanks, how's that balance go for you?
So, there's a few things going on there. The idea of the sort of the big business versus the local, and then also the people that teach at university, they actually probably get paid a lot less teaching at university than they would if they were working in practice. So they've made a choice to come and teach at university because they genuinely believe in education and, you know, and the ethos of what comes through this school and many other architecture schools. And often what I found is they're more sort of, generally the teachers are coming out more as socialists and Marxists than they are more capitalists. And then you're going into working in a big practice that is, you know, often led by clients who are developers. And so they are going to be wanting to make large amounts of money, and there's a different profit margin that goes on there within that situation. And so when you brought up about, you know, you go into work and the first thing they ask is, can you use Revit? So things like that actually comes from the commercial sector and the construction industry speaking directly to the policy and politicians and saying, you know, we really need Revit because that's efficient and that's really going to drive productivity and our profits. And so they're wanting the efficiency of programs like Revit to help drive that side of things. And so larger companies end up having to use Revit because the public sector's, you know, asked for Revit to be used. And so there's a real discrepancy between the education and the people who want to educate you and want you to believe in sort of changing the world and, you know, doing really good things in society, and then the big companies that are making large amounts of money that are driven by using Revit and their profit margins. And so there's a real friction there between those two things. And I guess from my perspective, thinking about really going as local as possible and saying actually it's okay that we want to think about craft and making, and we want to find clients that want to work with us in that way. It comes from a very different spectrum of how we taught and what's happening within big business. And all I can say is you've got to get out there and you've got to work within politics as much as everything else to try and make those changes and make a difference, so that we are thinking more about, when we design buildings, actually it's okay that, you know, you've really got to think about context, and they are unique approaches to delivery, and it's not that you're sitting in Revit and you might create something that can be dropped anywhere in the world. And we're trying to teach you that context and everything else is really important. And yeah, so there is a real imbalance between, in that respect, in what we're teaching, because it's how we believe architecture should be, and then the real world of high levels of profit and how buildings are delivered.
And somewhere in between a kind of political ambition, certainly here in Wales, for the drive for places, which are about people, and a much more rounded approach to the whole of what is happening in our nation. Piers, your practice has almost deliberately pursued that. Could you just give us your view on that, and then I just want a quick response from Dolunay, and I'm going to open up some questions.
I would say that in my own life, I quit mainstream practice because I didn't want that way of life. I didn't want that way of practice. I didn't want to go into practice and work 18 hours a day. I wanted to have a life. And in a way, the life that I have, the life that all the people who work with me have, is that they're constantly living as autonomous, free individuals that can choose to structure their work life as they want. They're always working, but they're always living. And in a way, if you love what you do and you're able to apply your kind of craft of architecture in the way that you want, it's incredibly empowering. And I don't think we need to check our life at the door when we go into a practice. I don't think we need to check our ethics at the door when we go and work for a big developer. I think we can keep those very close to us and apply those in the world.
Dolunay, let's have a conversation.
I would just like to say one thing. I think we're all talking about efficiency, and I don't run a business and I'm a student, but I don't understand how it is efficient for having workers working 18 hours, 19 hours a day without paying them. That doesn't strike me as an efficient method of working.
Well, it's a completely false situation, isn't it? You can't possibly cost what's really possible.
And anyway, I would like to make one more comment as well.
Please do.
I think if we are saying that we're working all our waking hours and we're creating living spaces for people and we're going into work but we're not going in there to enjoy ourselves, then how are we to design places that's enjoyable to live in, to work in?
That's what you preach. Yeah, okay. Right, let's hear from the floor. We've had some questions that have been submitted to us in advance, which is very helpful, thank you. I would really like, though, to give the first voice and question to a student, and preferably one that is in the room. I have a question here from Kevin Egon. Kevin, are you in the room? Yes, brilliant. You can get the mic up there.
I am Kevin from Piers of Architecture at the WSA. So the review recognizes that the architecture profession plays a leading role in combating unprecedented changes within the built environment, such as the global warming report of 1.5 degrees. And what do you think is the best way to kind of train us aspiring architects and designers in order to tackle these issues?
What a big question. Did you get that?
Yeah.
No. Okay, just, if I can just get this right, we didn't hear you that clearly, Dan.
Oh, okay. Should I say it again?
If you'd like to, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I was just, because I had some research for my dissertation, and I found out that the RBA recognizes that the architecture profession plays a leading role in combating the unprecedented changes within the built environment, such as the global warming report of 1.5 degrees from the IPCC. And I just wanted to know, what do you think is the best way for us aspiring designers and architects, in order to combat these issues and to tackle these issues?
Yeah, to take on the big issues of the day. Harriet.
Well, actually, I like the question, but there's always somewhat an antagonist. I kind of feel that the obligation isn't entirely yours as designers. I think that actually there needs to be government policy that obligates businesses to meet those targets. I think the RBA actually should start looking at who it issues charters to. And I think actually even the ARB should think more carefully about what registration means in terms of just giving us really some fairly ambiguous poetic terms to professionally practice by. And I think if they were more robust, those criteria could address issues about environment, they could address issues about representation within practices, because we know we've got major issues with underrepresentation of women, and we know we've got LGBTQ and racist discrimination happening in practices in the UK. So those could be addressed through stronger policies on the part of the RBA and LB. But I think it's not something that students should feel is their responsibility entirely, it's a shared responsibility, and it really should be coming from government policy and from the RBA and the ARB. In terms of what you can do though, I think what you can do is, if you have a bit of an autodidactic tantrum, and what I mean by that is to start telling your tutors, this brief does not really address these problems. This brief tells me to design a skyscraper for mice on the moon. I want something that's much more about addressing environmental problems or inequalities within communities that never ever get to see an architect or what good design is, or any of the other problems you think are pressing. And as I've been an educator for 15 years, maybe not that long, but one little secret I'll let you into is that most educators look to you all to know what you care about. What is the next trend? What is the nascent, pressing problem that is affecting your lives? Because that gives us a cue about where we should focus our briefs, how we should alter our pedagogies and our curricula. We want to make sure that your education reflects who you are, not just our old, if you like, historic and actually rather sexist and pell-mell and stale curricular and knowledge infrastructure, but to actually decolonise it in many ways. And that is also about thinking about the environmental damage that, if you like, the global north has always done to the global south, and doing something to address that problem as well. Sorry, that was a terribly long-winded answer.
It's
but
okay,
I think
I'm
it's a
glad you
great
got it
question.
out there. Don't worry, I'm glad you got it out. Piers, I can see you making lots of
Well,
notes
I
there.
just think, in a way, that your responsibilities as an architect are no different from any other citizen, which is that we have an obligation while the world is burning around us to deal with it, you know. And I think if we only ever talk about what shape and colour something is, it's a really boring life. And I think you very quickly get bored of it, however good designer you are. And I think that the real issues that we need to face as an architect are bigger than, you know, the shape and colour of a building. And how a building can bring about any kind of change is where the meat of an architectural problem actually really is. And I think within every project, if you choose your projects wisely, there's an ability to make a difference. So we have one rule we take on a project, which is, you know, what is the change that we're going to make through doing this project? I think if you choose your projects wisely, there's something incredibly empowering about, even in a small building, making change. If that change can be really straightforward, it can upskill someone through the making it. It can make a change in the place through the provision of that thing. It can, in itself, set a kind of precedent to do with reducing emissions or setting a precedent for a new kind of prototypical type of building that uses material in a different way. So I think in every case, we need to go beyond what we're given. You know, our obligation as architects is to go beyond what we're given and make it the best it can be.
Shanks.
Harriet, I have to disagree with you. I think that as students, you've got a huge part to play in global warming, and I think that here's an example. We were talking about sort of tall buildings. Very recently, there was a new supplementary planning document that came out from Bristol Council that said they were going to allow for 10-plus storey buildings, tower blocks in Bristol. So this sent me in a total tangent, sort of writing a whole series of articles and letters to various people and the council and Bristol 24/7, suggesting and trying to make people really aware that actually tower blocks are not sustainable, and we could be doing a more European-based model of, you know, 6 to 8 storey buildings and still create the kind of affordable housing that we need without it being tower blocks. We've had the NLA in London doing similar things with issues around tower blocks and them actually not being delivering affordable housing for people, and that in itself has a big part to play with global warming. I know it doesn't directly as you see it, but it does. And so I got sort of summoned to the council house by the mayor to have a conversation with him because I've been writing all these articles. And every single one of you could do this. Every single one of you could be having your part to play in our urban landscape, in everything from, like, you know, we should be cycling more, we should be dropping them out of cars with just one person driving them, we should be getting more affordable housing, we should be capping rents so that more people have more time to be able to do community projects and not have really high mortgages. All of these things together have an impact on the amount of energy that's used and the amount we're consuming. And you've all got a part to play in that.
As human beings, not as architects.
Yeah.
I can feel Gerard bristling here about high-rise buildings and sustainability. I'm going to give you a quick pop at that before I come back to Kevin to see if he's got a response on his document.
I think the first thing, I would say you can't be silent on these subjects. And, you know, when you're in practice, you form a manifesto for yourself and you follow through on your manifesto. And when you have a manifesto, you have to be sure that you understand what you're saying. And so, for example, you know, one of our biggest challenges in terms of the overall environment today is density. And it's in terms of density and density where people are. And there's many pitfalls you can fall into by looking at small examples of trying to assimilate answers to those issues on a small scale. And part of the thing which I think is emerging in the world is the fact that projects are becoming bigger, and actually there's now more and more information available in terms of what are causing the issues and how to combat the issues in the future. And to pick up the point about towers, if you look at the energy consumed and the CO2 emissions from cities like Detroit, which are huge, sprawling centres, low-rise centres, they are disasters. If you compare those cities to places like Singapore and Hong Kong, which are very dense, highly vibrant cities, you'll find that the emissions and the sustainability of those cities is far higher. So I think the challenge is looking wider than our local domain, and I think in terms of everybody's responsibility, and certainly as as people who are being educated in terms of the built environment, the responsibility is with all of us, and we have to make the necessary noise.
Kevin, how does it matter to you? Is your purpose about making the necessary noise?
Yeah, I think it's I was just wondering, because obviously we're kind of aspiring designers and architects. I'm just wondering, what can we do? I mean, it's already been answered, but yeah, it's just made me curious as, what can I do now to kind of prepare myself to, all this unprecedented changes that's happening right now. Because I feel like, good point from Harrison, in terms of the RIBA and ARB actually pushing legislations to, as part of the curriculum to prepare us with radical changes. I was also looking at how as students can we actually understand these radical problems, such as with global warming. Is there enough pressure within the school to actually make us think about, how do we design? In 2050 we're going to be, with a zero emission carbon footprint and all that legislation. Are we prepared enough to, because we're the next generation of architects, are we prepared enough to kind of combat these issues?
Sounds like you just framed the next debate. Thank you very much, Kevin. Open it up a bit wider. You've all heard a lot. There must be people in the room that have things they want to ask or contribute. So can I take some more questions? Gentlemen at the back here, on the right-hand side of the theatre, can we get the mic up there? Could you please say who you are and use the microphone? Thank you.
Hi. My name is Paul Garamola, and I'm studying here. I just started my 4th year at the WSA, started last year. I just wanted to actually pick up on Kevin's point, and also a point that Gerard made about making a noise. So I'm part of an architecture collective called 3.09, which started last year, January, and it was birthed by two of our founders who were looking into gender equity in cities and gender equality in cities. And so I met her at a networking event, and since then there's been 12 of us, and we've done a couple of projects leading on to a conference that we had last year, September, in sort of partnership with the Brixton Design Trail. And it was just interesting that you talked about making noise, and that was really something that we're trying to achieve. If gender equity in cities was an issue that we all seem to be passionate about, so we decided to host a conference and invited people from sort of AHMM, HCA, we had a panel, and we all discussed about it, and there's a couple of podcasts coming out soon. So that was actually sort of a note for Kevin as an encouragement that you can actually make a noise about it. It was a struggle for us in terms of funding. We sort of built a pavilion as well, and I was actually going to lead up onto my question, which is as sort of students trying to make that noise. To you guys, how much help do you have available for us, for example? One of the things that I just pointed out that we struggled with was funding. We were trying to raise about £8,000 for the pavilion, but we were only able to raise about £2,500. So we had to change the design of the pavilion a couple of times. And then we only had like a week to build it because the site that we had was sort of taken away from us as well at the same time. So it's how much how much contribution to the noise that we need to make as students are you providing? Yeah.
Piers, in the context of education, how much help and support
How much help does practice provide? To empower you to be able to have your voice heard, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's, I think to change the question very slightly, I actually don't think architecture is good at dealing with big issues that bring about change, any kind of change. Architecture kind of likes the status quo. You know, what's really interesting about architecture is that it's a super new profession. It's been around since the Renaissance, and we're kind of dispensable. Most of the world makes architecture about architects, you know, and yet we kind of obsess over this thing that's kind of super marginal in making buildings. You know, it's kind of interesting, but actually it's really marginal. And the real change is not in whether a building is like this or like that, but it's happening in parts of the world where there is enormous change that is happening in a single generation. If you look at the middle band of the world that has gone from kind of rural to urban, you know, in a single generation, that's where the world has exploded with change in my lifetime. And if we look at the things that are really pressing in this country, there's a huge north-south divide. There's a huge issue in the north of the country, what we do post-industry. So when industry was taken away from us in the north of England, north of the country, in the kind of 1970s, it was replaced with nothing. Towns were decimated, everyone moved south. You know, what do we do with this issue where people go to work in disempowering jobs and call centres? What do we do with, you know, the whole issue of subtopia, which is to do with kind of nowhere land that is everywhere in, you know, this country? What do we do with our infrastructure that's kind of failing? You know, and actually, architecture is not interested in those things. Really, architecture is interested in, you know, making another shiny ball that we can all get excited about on the cover of a magazine. So in a way, anything we do to kind of resist that, I think, is a positive thing. And anything, I don't know, is practice supporting you in doing that? No, it's not. Practice is maintaining the status quo.
Yeah, it wasn't about practice at all, and it was something that we sort of had to do on the side. I think I must agree with you in terms of we struggle to essentially find the right partnership to raise about to bring about the change that we're looking to happen. So we have to spend a lot of time outside of work because we couldn't even get our practices to come on board. It wasn't sort of until the final 2 weeks leading to the conference that we got some sort of a donation and putting up publicity about what was going on. And then eventually, on the day of the conference, it turned out to be really successful in terms of the turnout. And then the interest picked up, so it was like, why did you take so long?
To play hardball, though, I would say it's probably really good for you to think you wanted $8 grand. You only had 2. You had to make it work for 2. Your side was taken away. Actually, I think that's really good training.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's the consensus. We've got, Piers, you talked about time there and the pace of change. I just want to introduce a question here that's been sent in, a little bit tangential in some ways, but it goes to the heart of the pace of change. It's not just, you know, everything's always changing, it's just now just how fast it is changing. This question comes from Alex Gordon, Associate Director of Jessica Wiles, yeah. He's asking really are architects sleepwalking into oblivion and whether or not architectural education is helping young architects adapt to the harsh realities. Are you sleepwalking into oblivion?
Well, it's interesting because the Mori poll that was done in the US a couple of years ago identified that by 2050, 85% of the jobs that we will be doing haven't been invented yet. So if you think about the advent of the iPhone or what an app designer is, we never heard of these things 30 years ago, and now they're dominating the creative industries. So I think that, you know, as Piers said, we're quite a young profession in many ways, and there's no guarantees that our profession will necessarily prevail unless it maintains its relevance. And obviously, architecture is an industry that has seen massive increases in the last even 15 years in terms of automation and the dependency on technology and programs and so on. When I was a student, potentially where Piers was too, it was all about, you know, scratching away on bits of tracing paper with razor blades, trying to correct your mistakes, you know, on A1 drawing boards. So it's a different world now. So I think that this comes back to the point that Chris made earlier about the characteristic of what education is, and also Piers when he talks about education as education and not trying to somehow mimic practice too closely. But I think that the obsolescence problem is something that is, in many ways, potentially a creative design brief for you guys to figure out what else could you do with architecture expertise.
I think there's a fantastic opportunity at the moment with technology. And the fantastic opportunity is the fact that the construction industry is a sleepy hollow. So the construction industry doesn't want to change. So what they do is they encourage you with their talk of sustainable living, to think about traditional methods of construction, traditional methods of doing things. And actually, the biggest challenge is how we use the technology that we've got. And the technology that we've got has begun to rapidly, yes, 30 years ago we were using razor blades. Now nothing is done outside of the machine. But the fact is, what we're producing as an end game is still being produced in exactly the same way as it was being produced 30 years ago. So the challenge is how do you begin to change the construction industry? And the big difficulty with that is you can show the construction industry all sorts of different ways of improving performance, improving methods of delivery, improving production numbers of units. But the problem is that from a governmental point of view, that's driven by profits. And because people are aware of their profit margins, they're aware of where their profits come from within the construction industry, nobody wants to change. And that's the biggest problem with housing in this country right now, is that nobody wants to change. And I think, the challenge for anyone in your positions now, coming through the educational system, is how you actually begin to educate that other part of the industry to take that forward, because that's critical if things are going to be successful in the future.
Other changes within that context surely are necessary. You touched in your question on your project being about gender equality in cities. We haven't come to two things Dolunay raised with me so far, and we've got very little time, so I just want to throw these in, small issues as they are. Age and the value of your opinion when you go to practice, we talked about. And we talked about gender and some of the equalities. Do you want to say some of those things about your experience?
I think going back to your point about walking oblivion into the harsh realities, I think there's this preconception that young people are so naive that they don't know what's happening out there. We know that we're getting out of BU and we're not going to be able to buy a house, and that the architecture profession doesn't pay. We know these harsh realities. The reason why we're still all here is because we're hoping to change this. And I think, going back to what Gerard was saying, if we do have the potential and we do have the skills and we're learning about these technologies that are in the education more so than in practice, but if we're going out there and we're not being given the opportunity to show this, and we're not taught the skills to be able to set out on our own, and we are stiffened in this part 1, part 2, part 3 hierarchical structure where there's no other way, we cannot find another way to get experience, then we can't do anything. And that is the frustration that comes out. It's not that we are naive, it's that we don't get the platform to be able to raise our voice, and then people think we don't have one.
And is part of that about culture within practice? Is that partly about culture? That's not a technical issue, is it? It's the culture of practice.
I think it is culture in practice, but it starts in education. It starts with the tutor-student relationship and how you report. And if you're being examined by harshly being criticised, and these criticisms are not just about your project. We all know this. We've all experienced personal criticisms as well that simply would not happen in everyday life. You wouldn't go out there and talk in this way, and I'm sure most of the tutors up here just wouldn't go out there and talk like this with their friends. So how is this acceptable in a university environment where we're all adults? And this then translates into the practice where these architects are taught that this is the way.